VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. We're glad that you've joined us today as we talk about a topic that's really been one that's been on the front pages of the newspaper, that of Islam. And we have seen, a lot of promotion of moderate Islam. We keep hearing through national leaders that Islam is a religion of peace. And, of course, we have done numerous programs here on this network that have certainly warned about the Islamist agenda and what lies ahead. We've talked about the great persecution that's taking place in many nations. But is there a plan for America? Is there a plan for the world? It's our privilege to have with us today Ryan Mauro, who is the National Security Analyst for RadicalIslam.org, is a founder of WorldThreats.com, is a consultant to government agencies and an adjunct professor, frequently interviewed on Fox News. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You wrote an article recently in which you indicated that one of the mistakes that the West is making is that the West is not listening to what Islamists are saying. So what is it that Islamists are saying that we're just not hearing?
Well, first of all, just so the audience knows, what an Islamist is someone that takes their faith of Islam and they give it a political context. So it's not just praying 5 times a day, going to mosque on Friday. It is the code for governance, and that's what you're seeing happen in Egypt and elsewhere around the world. But the strategy that they talk about is something called gradualism. That's what they call it. Here you hear sometimes the terms like stealth jihad, and people say that that's too dramatic. But the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists overseas talk about the same thing, but they call it gradualism. And basically what it is a bottom-up approach towards achieving their objectives, their ultimate objective being overtaking Western civilization, but over the short term, converting people to Islam, destroying the church's support for Israel, for example. Interfaith engagement with churches and Christian organizations is a huge thing that they're focusing on right now, and that's how they try and infect the church with anti-Israel propaganda. And I've got news for you, it's working.
Wow. And so those coexist bumper stickers we see everywhere, that's all a part of it, isn't it?
Depending on which organization is behind it, yes. There are organizations that have been set up by the Muslim Brotherhood, ones that have horrifically anti-Israel agendas, and this is what they do. They approach churches that say, look, to show our tolerance for each other, let's get together and hold an event. And there's nothing wrong with that in principle, but from that personal relationship, they start bringing the church in an anti-Israel direction and also try and give their own organizations legitimacy, because if you were founded by the Muslim Brotherhood or you have a radical past, one of the best things you can do is have your picture taken holding the hand of a pastor, shaking his hand, and so you can say, look, we're the good guys.
Yeah. Is gradualism something new?
No, it's not. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt all the way back in 1928, and they're more accustomed to Western culture than Al-Qaeda is. So, for example, on 9/11, we all think of Al-Qaeda. We think about these guys that scream Allahu Akbar and they get a gun, they start shooting people. But that is more new than what the Muslim Brotherhood has been doing since 1928. They're smarter. They think more long-term. And what they do is they come into Western societies and they're very patient and they try and influence the culture and politics.
Now, you actually, in your article, you called gradualism an intelligent form of jihad. Is that rather strong?
No, I think it is the smartest form of jihad, because let's think about what Al-Qaeda did. They carry out an attack, they kill 3,000 Americans. Now what happened? The Taliban gets overthrown in Afghanistan, you had U.S. forces invade Iraq, all these countries came against them as a result of U.S. pressure. Their networks in the United States got rolled up. The other groups like Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, they have big fundraising and recruiting networks here. They're not going to carry out an attack and jeopardize that network. They think about the consequences of their actions in ways that Al-Qaeda does not.
Now, Ryan, there is a 6-step approach to gradualism that you point out in your article, but I'd like you to take us through those. But where did these 6 steps come from?
Their own words. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood leadership openly talks about. And this is not just what they talk about publicly, but we also have seized some of their own internal documents where they talk about carrying this out in America. For example, there's a Muslim Brotherhood document, a U.S. Muslim Brotherhood document, I should say, because they have a branch here, that the FBI got a hold of from 1991. And they described their work in America as a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within. That's an exact quote from the Muslim Brotherhood's own documents.
My. Take us through those 6 steps, so help our listeners understand the gradualism that goes on in their plan of attack, so to speak.
Sure. The Muslim Brotherhood operates in phases, and they plan the phases out in great detail. And the 6 phases that the Muslim Brotherhood over in Egypt talks about in order to install Sharia law around the world begins with Sharia over the individual. That's where a supporter of radical Islam incorporates it into his daily life. The second phase is he converts his family to it. The third phase is he spreads it through local society. And then the fourth phase is when that philosophy takes over the government. And that's what you just saw happen in Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood took over there. The fifth phase, which we have yet to see happen, and it's going to take some work for them to get there, is the resurrection of the Caliphate, a Middle Eastern Islamic superstate that destroys Israel and is a superpower. And then the final step is what they call mastership of the world. You resurrect the Caliphate, you spread your ideology, and you become so strong that you basically control the world as you wish.
So you mentioned basically Egypt at step 4, Sharia over the government, and yet here this week we're sending F-16 fighter jets, we're sending tanks to Egypt.
Right, and it's outrageous. We made that agreement to sell the F-16s to the Mubarak regime in Egypt that no longer exists. We didn't sign that agreement with the Muslim Brotherhood government, so I don't think that we were obliged to arm them, especially when they say that Jews are the descendants of apes and pigs.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe it was Senator McCain who went over and said, well, it may not be the best words to use, but he saw nothing to block all these implements going over to Egypt. Rather appalling.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous, and it comes down to the fact that we do not, it's very politically incorrect to acknowledge the fact that we are fighting an ideology. And if you're a policymaker, it's tempting to overlook that because fighting an ideology is hard. Fighting al-Qaeda is relatively easy. If you narrow down the conflict to just al-Qaeda, then you kill bin Laden, you kill the individual members, you lock them up. That's a war that's a lot more winnable. It's a short-term conflict. And if that's your definition of the war that we're in, as just a fight against al-Qaeda, then yes, we're relatively close to the end. But the fight is much larger than that. We are in a fight against forces that believe in the destruction of Israel, the ultimate destruction of the West, a mindset, and an interpretation of a religion. And by the way, we have many Muslim allies that we need to embrace in that battle.
Assuming that there is a U.S. strategy for Islamists, what step are we in the U.S.?
Well, according to the Muslim Brotherhood's own documents, what was written back in 1991, they said they're in Phase 3. For the United States specifically, they had a 5-phase plan. Before we talked about the more general 6-phase plan, but they have a more specific 5-phase plan for the United States, beginning with the secret establishment of leadership, which was accomplished back in the late 1950s, the 60s, and somewhat the 70s, when the Muslim Brotherhood set up the major institutions of the Muslim American community so that they could try and control the community here. And then the second phase was the gradual appearance on the public scene. That's when they engage in political influence operations through these supposedly benign Muslim American organizations, and you're still seeing that happen today. According to the Muslim Brotherhood, we're now in the third phase, which they call the escalation phase, which is an emphasis on utilizing mass media, which you're seeing daily examples of, where you have organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was set up by the Muslim Brotherhood, actually having their spokespeople up on Fox, MSNBC, and CNN.
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I was alarmed to see that even at the recent inauguration of our president, there was something going on called the Muslim American Inaugural Benefit Gala. What can you tell us about that?
To be honest with you, I wasn't paying attention to that specific event, so I'm not sure. But what these Muslim American organizations do, the ones that are bad, that come from the Muslim Brotherhood, because there's some good ones and there's some bad ones, but what the bad ones are doing is they're trying to make it sound like the Muslim American community is just as important politically as the Jewish community.
Well, looking here, and there's a recent article there at radicalislam.org, they talked about advertisements for a Muslim event celebrating Barack Obama's inauguration, showed a minaret superimposed over the White House. A Facebook flyer for the event features the same minaret over the American flag. This was sponsored by CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and also ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. And I believe what we're seeing, Ryan, is a greater and greater desensitivity, so to speak, on the part of the American people toward Islam, radical Islam, exactly where things are going.
Right, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we have to be honest, there has been some unfair discrimination against Muslim Americans in the past, and so the media and your average Americans view them as the underdog, as being victimized, and so there's a tendency to want to overlook some of this stuff because they don't want to reinforce that sentiment that's out there. And so there's a huge amount of political correctness. You have reporters that jump at anyone that says something bad about one of these major Muslim American organizations. It happened to me, for example. There's a group called the Muslim Public Affairs Council that's horrifically anti-Israel, that they came from the Muslim Brotherhood members, their leadership, and they have a bad record saying that, for example, Hamas shouldn't be considered a terrorist organization. And they held their annual convention this year inside of an Episcopal church in California. And I wrote an article criticizing that, and they subsequently held a press conference at that church condemning me as a right-wing extremist for saying that, and the media just fell for it.
Wow. Well, Ryan, you also wrote about something known as the Project that took us back to a raid by Swiss authorities. What do you know about that?
Right, that was in 2001 after 9/11, the Swiss police raided the home of a senior Muslim Brotherhood member named Youssef Nada. And they got a hold of another secret document from the 1980s, again showing the same type of strategy that the Muslim Brotherhood does, where it's very long-term, very incremental change, nonviolent change, and it outlined the same thing. And it included, for example, aligning with non-Muslim political forces in order to advance your agenda. And that goes back to what we've been talking about, where they engage churches and politicians to try and pressure them into anti-Israel lines, and try and influence our domestic and foreign policy in a way that's more fitting to their interests. I mean, after the Arab Spring began, and you heard a lot of voices saying the Muslim Brotherhood isn't as bad as people say, where do you think that was coming from? That was coming from the Muslim Brotherhood lobby here in the United States.
So does the Israeli-Palestinian conflict weigh into all of this?
It absolutely does, because that is the number one concern of the Islamists right now. So they're directing most of their effort right now at demonizing Israel, trying to rip the church away from supporting Israel, but it doesn't end there. The only reason that that's the number one issue right now is because that's where Jerusalem is, and it's right there in the heart of where a caliphate would be built. You could eliminate Israel, and this conflict would still be going on. There would just be another grievance. You're
listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ryan Mauro is our guest. Our topic today is Gradualism, the Islamic Strategy for Victory. And we're going to take a quick break and come back to some more vital information that you need to know. And also, we would suggest you have handy a sheet of paper, a pen, or a pencil, because our guest has something that he wants to make you aware of as well that we trust will be a benefit to you. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, can science learn anything from the creation-evolution debate?
They certainly can, Chris, and I wish they would. Students are normally taught evolution as if it were a fact. They're presented with a one-sided view of the data and are not even allowed to think critically about it. If they were, I think it would make for better scientists and better science. Scientific conclusions don't just arrive spontaneously out of a list of facts that have been selectively gathered. Why should science be limited to one politically correct version? And why should students be taught as if there were only one side to a multi-sided issue? Yes, Chris, scientists can learn much from the creation-evolution controversy. It might even lead them back to Genesis.
If you want to know more about the creation evolution issue, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. Back to Genesis is a production of the Institute for Creation Research. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ryan Mauro is our guest, National Security Analyst for RadicalIslam.org, also founder of WorldThreats.com. Ryan, you're affiliated with an organization that has put forth just a very powerful DVD known as Obsession. Tell us about it.
Right, Obsession was the first documentary that we put out, and we actually shipped somewhere around 30 million copies around the United States in 2008, and it caused quite a stir. But it really woke up a lot of people in the country to the threat of radical Islam, and it's a documentary that includes interviews with former terrorists, a lot of footage from Middle Eastern TV stations that you won't see anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very powerful documentary, and for your audience, where they can get it for free from us and mailed to their house, if they just pay for shipping, they can go to getobsession.com. That's getobsession.com, and then in the coupon code, type in Crosstalk, and then you'll be able to get it for free.
Okay, so that's getobsession.com?
That's right.
And then in the coupon section, they just type in the word Crosstalk.
Right, and then they can just get it for free and mail to their house.
Great.
And they show it at their church as well. We're very big on the church outreach.
Okay, getobsession.com, getobsession.com, and then a coupon section, put in Crosstalk, and they'll send you a copy just for the cost of shipping it to you. Ryan, as we talked about this doctrine of gradualism, their strategy that's there as far as Sharia over the individual, then the family, then society, then government, the resurrection of the caliphate, and then mastership of the world, is our nation's intelligence, the CIA, and domestically the FBI, are they aware of this?
Some of them are and some of them aren't. Some of them have bought into the propaganda of the Muslim Brotherhood front organizations because they're so focused on al-Qaeda that they look at these other organizations that condemn al-Qaeda and condemn terrorism, and they say, those are the moderates that we're looking for. And so they embrace them. You have other FBI agents who I've talked to, though, that are frustrated by that, but by and large can't do anything because, like I said, the Muslim Brotherhood is smart. Most Islamists don't want to break the law in a way that they get caught. Many of them end up doing it, but for the most part, their goal is to be successful, and you're not going to be successful if you break the law and end up in prison.
Well, and again, the allegations of Muslim Brotherhood members coming in with meetings at the White House?
And that's 100% true. You can go to the White House and look at the visitor logs. There is a long history of individuals tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, their front organizations being courted by the White House and by politicians on both sides. Throughout the 1990s, for example, there was a man named Abdurrahman al-Amodi, and he was kind of like the moderate Muslim rock star of the day, and the State Department would even pay for his travel to go overseas. And he said everything you'd want to hear. He is now in prison on terrorism-related charges.
Ryan, I'd like you to address another issue, and I think it's something to help our listeners know the prevalence of this even within the United States. You wrote about it recently, about a Islamist conference that was held in the United States in December 2012. What can you tell us about that conference?
Sure. That was an Islamist conference that was run by two organizations called Muslim American Society, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front. It was founded by Muslim Brotherhood members here in the United States. And then the Islamic Circle of North America, which was created by members of a Pakistani Islamist group and works with the Muslim Brotherhood. So these two organizations came together, and they held a conference in Illinois, and they brought together all of the superstars of the Islamist movement in the United States, people that have endorsed Hamas, endorsed the destruction of Israel, in some cases even endorsed Sharia law overthrowing American democracy. So they bring together all these people, all these speakers, to basically parrot the Islamist line to the degree that they can, and they, according to their own website, they had almost 10,000 people attend this conference.
And I was surprised to see, is it really true that the Dish Network was a sponsor of the event?
Yes. the Dish Network's logo, it was printed on the bags that people that attended the conference got when they paid for the sign-up fee.
I'm just kind of baffled at that. I mean, what does a Dish Network have to do with something like this?
I guess it's just their way of trying to promote a good image of the company among the Muslim American community, which is a relatively successful community in the United States. Who knows how it actually came about, but I haven't heard back from Dish Network since I wrote that article. Another company that's engaged in this type of sponsorship is Best Buy. Last year, it came out that Best Buy had donated about $1,500 to the Council on American Islamic Relations, which, like I said before, is a Muslim Brotherhood entity tied to Hamas. And they held a conference, a fundraiser, and in Minnesota it was, and so Best Buy sponsored it. And we said, look, we know Best Buy isn't full of terrorism experts. These guys do a good job of covering their tracks. They may have just screwed up. Let's give them a chance to correct their mistake. And what Best Buy did was they reacted not by saying we're sorry. They defended their donation to this organization and said, oh, well, we support diversity, implying that us, the critics, don't, that we're intolerant. And at that point, we launched a boycott that now has somewhere around 15,000 people that have signed up for that boycott of Best Buy in retaliation, and they're still not backing down.
WND carried a story, WorldNet Daily, about a Muslim Brotherhood-linked organization that's partnered with the U.S. Department of Education, the State Department, to facilitate this online program aiming to connecting U.S. schools with classrooms abroad by the year 2016. They're calling it Connect All Schools. It's a project with I believe it's pronounced Qatar Foundation, which is close to the Muslim Brotherhood. But they say that they were inspired by President Obama's speech in the Arab world in June of 2009 in Egypt, when he spoke of creating a new online network so a young person in Kansas can communicate instantly with a young person in Cairo. We also hear about Islam being promoted through our U.S. textbooks and in the classrooms. Is this all a part of gradualism, or at least desensitivity towards some of these things?
I think so, definitely on the part of the Muslim Brotherhood and the government of Qatar. The government of Qatar is supposedly a U.S. ally. We have a major base there, and we do work with them on some things very closely, and they're more westernized, but they are funding the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, here at home in the United States, and throughout the region. That's where Al Jazeera is located. Al Jazeera is the big Arab network that really incites anti-Americanism throughout the region. For example, the Muslim Brotherhood's spiritual leader, a guy named Sheikh Qaradawi, a guy who says just horrible things about Jews and Israel and the West, and a very, very radical guy, has his own show on Al Jazeera in Qatar, and he broadcasts his views to about 60 million people each week.
And now coming to a television set near us in the U.S.?
And that's what's so outrageous about this, is that the Al Jazeera Arabic station, the main station, is very, very anti-American, but then they set up Al Jazeera English, which is the one that, frankly, I'll read and watch. And it's just because the mainstream media does such a terrible job of covering Middle Eastern events that, by comparison, Al Jazeera English does a good job. And they're relatively fair, and so people point to Al Jazeera English and say, these are good guys. But at the end of the day, they are a branch of Al Jazeera in the Middle East, which is horrible. And so when Al Jazeera comes to a set near you and you watch it, that's where the money's going. So you may look at it and say, oh, well, this coverage isn't so bad, but it's profiting the bad guys, the Muslim Brotherhood, overseas. And my mind was just blown when I read the report about how Al Jazeera had purchased for about $100 million Al Gore's current TV network, and he had earlier turned down Glenn Beck's offer because he said that the network's beliefs were more aligned with Al Jazeera than Glenn Beck.
Well, and the sad part is we're really going to be in for a whole lot more of Islamist promotion, or at least funding it through the new network. As you pointed out, the Al Jazeera Arabic, far different than Al Jazeera English version, but what a concern to see funds going to support that, which is actually working toward the overthrow of the United States.
Right, the destruction of Israel and supporting Hamas. And at first what will probably happen is Al Jazeera America will probably look very good. And then once the the light is off of them and people aren't paying attention, they'll start testing the barrier a little bit and seeing how they can make slight modifications to their coverage to be more anti-Israel and anti-Western, pro-Hamas and pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and see how far they can push things. And with the American ADD mindset, as long as you do it just little by little that way, most people aren't going to notice.
I was also kind of stunned by a story I read this week, and I really see it as being part of the gradualism to indoctrinate the United States, the citizens, into a more acceptance of Islam, and Islamicism therefore follows after that. But I was rather shocked to read the story that came about a couple McDonald's restaurants in Dearborn, Michigan, advertise its food as being prepared according to Islamic dietary law that's, meeting the Islamic requirements for preparing this food in God's name, and as his name's got to be invoked before an animal providing meat for the consumption is slaughtered. But it was alleged that a certain McDonald's restaurant ran out of this halal food, which they get from an approved halal provider, substituted it then with regular McDonald's food. But in the settlement, the notice came from Finley's Management, which I believe is the local franchise owner, saying it has a carefully designed system for preparing and serving halal, such that halal chicken products are labeled, stored, refrigerated, cooked in halal-only areas. Company added, we train our employees on preparing halal food, requires strict adherence to the process. Any comment on that?
Well, the fact that, if I remember correctly, McDonald's got sued because of the discrepancy over how they were preparing their food. And I guess besides the fact that that's intimidation and, these kind of oversized lawsuits is just another way of using American democracy in order to intimidate your opponents, this type of overreaction comes from the Islamist ideology. It's not normal for people, when that happens, to get so upset that they try and wage these huge lawsuits, or, for example, the anti-Islam video that went out on YouTube that was horribly made and was supposedly, at first, the Obama administration said, responsible for the killing of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Libya. It's not normal to react this way. Very often we hear, and I think it comes from a certain level of cultural relativism that's infecting this country, that, we provoke these individuals. That when we criticize Islam or someone draws Muhammad, well, we provoke them into attacking us. Mm-hmm. It is not normal to respond to being offended this way. This is something that has to be taught.
$700,000 settlement on that lawsuit. When we talk about gradualism, how can our listeners be proactive in this matter?
They can go to radicalislam.org, and they can sign up for our biweekly newsletter, and they can also reach out to me at ryan@radicalislam.org. One of the things I'm putting a lot of work into is showing screenings of our films and also having speaking engagements at churches across the country, so I can wake them up not just to the problem overall, but how it relates to the church specifically, like what we said before about how some of these Islamist groups are teaming up with churches and forming anti-Israel alliances, because the fact is that the forces of radical Islam understand the power of the church. And so people on my side, on our side, have to activate the church in response.
Again, folks, that website, radicalislam.org. And let me also mention the other one, the Obsession DVD, GetObsession.com. And when you go to that site, you'll see a big red box that says, send me my free DVDs. And you click on that. It asks for a coupon. You put in the word crosstalk. And for the cost of shipping expense, they will get that off to you. GetObsession.com. And what kind of turnaround time would they expect?
I'm not sure, but we should send it to you very quickly.
Very good. Well, let's take a quick 60-second break, and folks, we're opening our phone lines as well. If you have questions or comments about this topic of gradualism, the Islamist strategy for victory, our toll-free number here to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. We'll be right back.
The tidal wave of Islam is sweeping across America. But do you know what Muslims believe? VCY America is making available a handy-sized booklet, The Facts on Islam, which spotlights Islam's explosive growth and increasing influence in the world. You'll find this booklet by apologists John Ankerberg and John Weldon a ready reference guide, answering many questions such as, how did Islam begin? Who was Muhammad? What does jihad signify? Is Allah like the God of the Bible? What does Islam teach about Jesus Christ? Does the Quran deny the Bible? What basic problems does the Quran present to Muslims? And many other questions. The Facts on Islam booklet is available for a donation of $7 by writing VCY America at 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53208. Or you may make your donation by phone by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's toll-free, 1-800-729-9829.
Gradualism, the Islamic strategy for victory, is our topic here today on Crosstalk, as we're speaking with Ryan Mauro, security analyst for RadicalIslam.org. You can certainly check out that site, worldthreats.com, as well. For that DVD, getobsession.com, and put in Crosstalk for the coupon code. But as we talk about this gradualism, Sharia over the individual, then over the family, then over society, then over government, resurrection of the caliphate, and finally, mastership of the world. That is the doctrine of gradualism, folks, and it's being employed. As our guest here today said, step 4 is going on in Egypt right now. Let's pick up your calls here today at Crosstalk. We're going to begin in Pensacola, Florida. And Benjamin, thanks for calling. You're on the air.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I believe the Bible is an infallible word of God and that we should support Israel. But could you explain to me how we can support the people that do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that makes them any different from the Hindu or the Muslims or anybody else that does not believe? Can you put
Benjamin? I'm sorry. Our topic today is gradualism and talking about the influx of Islam. Do you have a question pertaining to our topic today?
Yes. The question is, how can we support Israel when they do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah?
Okay, Benjamin, that is not our topic here today, but I would refer you back to Genesis chapter 12. You may want to take a look at that aspect. Let's go to the nation of England. Robert's listening over the internet. Robert, you're on the air.
Hi there, Jim, and thank you for letting me comment on this. 2 points I'll mention as quickly as I can, and then you can discuss them. One is that there was a report about a week ago of some incidents in London where some Muslim vigilante groups have been doing things like taking alcohol off people in the streets, burning indecent posters for women's underwear and so on, and that is basically an attempt to impose Sharia law. But the report on that does say that somebody who is the chief executive of a group called the Ramadan Foundation has condemned this vigilante behavior, so not all Muslims are in favor of it by any means. The other observation is that about a month back I was listening to something on Arutz Shava, and the host, Tamar Yona, had a guest on, Ceylan Osmadok from Turkey, who describes herself as a peace activist and was basically saying, well, the Jews can live in peace in Israel once they submit to the Turkish-based caliphate that will bring peace to the whole world. And very interesting interview. You could obviously see the taqiyya that Ceylan Osmadok was indulging in, and Tamar handled it very well and tied her up in knots and did a very good job of exposing some of the strategies of the Muslims.
Any comment there, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. First, as for the Turkish woman that you're referring to, it's someone I'm familiar with. And I think that there was some misinterpretation of what she was saying. She does support kind of a Turkish union across the Middle East, but it does not include Israel. Israel she supports as an independent state. She's not anti-Semitic. And I think overall the message that she puts forth in the Middle East is definitely one that we need to hear. She condemned Hamas, for example. As for the issue of not all Muslims being Islamists, that's absolutely true. I've done an analysis of just some of the polls that have been out there of the Muslim American community, and the majority are very moderate and don't believe in this stuff. But the problem is that the most powerful organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, and these other groups have a more radical record than your average Muslim here in the United States. But if you go to radicalislam.org and you look at the interviews at the bottom, I'm often interviewing Muslims against Islamists, activists that are fighting against this ideology, to make that very point that we have Muslim allies in this struggle. And just one additional point about London, what he's referring to, Europe, there's all sorts of crazy things going on there. There was actually an incident where a very radical Islamic group was putting up posters declaring areas of Britain to be a Sharia zone. And in another incident, an Islamist was elected the mayor of Tower Hamlets. So there's the more overt, aggressive strategy where they just straight up take over, and then there's the manipulation of the political system that takes place.
Appreciate the call there, Robert. And do you see a time coming, Ryan, give me your opinion on this, when Islamists will pressure the term that you use, moderate Muslims, to follow after them?
That's already been happening. If you're a moderate Muslim that takes an active stand against the Islamists, you put yourself in a very dangerous situation and also a very lonely situation. For example, the Fort Dix plot. Most people don't know this, but that terrorist plot was partially foiled because we had a Muslim informant that went to the FBI because he learned some information and wanted to stop it. And while most Muslims did not agree with that terrorist plot, according to that Muslim FBI informant, they felt betrayed by him because at the end of the day, you don't betray your fellow brothers and sisters in the faith. And so they turned against him. And it was just a very sad but revealing story to hear him go to the press about this.
And also, we just want to point out as well, there's a lot of persecution taking place. Places like Iran, I understand a pastor seized recently facing the death penalty.
Yes, and he apparently has been told by people working at the prison that he's being held at that they intend to hang him. And by the way, the prison that he's being held at is called Evin Prison, and that's a torture house.
Wow. Let's go. By the way, folks, our number 800-733-9829. Michael in Florida, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. I believe that's the question is, do you have the answer to this? In the last 30 to 40 years, we have supported Syria, Libya, Egypt, and all the nations. How many dollar for dollar have we sent there for all kind of aids and medical aids and anything else? How many? What's the number of dollars that we sent over there?
I'm not sure, but it's definitely tens of billions. I mean, the budget for Egypt alone has been over $1 billion a year. That's not even including the amount of money that we give to the other Muslim countries in the area.
Okay, my question is this. Then why are we still doing it? Because they would never come alongside us and be true friends. So why are we doing it?
Well, at the rationale for it was that during the Cold War, there were dictators in place that were anti-Soviet and less anti-Israel than groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. Like, no one would, for example, argue the fact that Mubarak, the former dictator of Egypt that was overthrown, was better for Israel and better for us than the Muslim Brotherhood, the guys that are currently in power. And so the idea of giving him aid in order to ensure that peace with Israel made sense. But the problem is what comes after, because dictatorships, especially as globalization increases with the internet and the culture spreads, dictatorships just can't be sustained anymore. And so we have to deal with the fact that these unpopular dictatorships and tyrannical regimes that we may like for the moment aren't going to be around in the near future.
Well, you know what? My statement's right here. As I grew up as a kid, all bullies, you can't pay them off. You got to fight them.
Yep.
Interesting. Thank you, Michael, for your call here today. We've had a couple lines open up again. 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. Next to Victoria, Texas. Jacob, you're on the air.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Schneider. Good afternoon, Mr. Mauro. I was watching C-SPAN today, and they were having the nomination hearing for Chuck Hagel. I mean for John Kerry on the TV, and somebody asked him if he supported Chuck Hagel, and he said yes. And he was talking. I was listening to him. And he was talking about the interfaith dialogue. He didn't call it that. He was talking about imams and ayatollahs and grand muftis and all this coming together with quote Christians, end quote. And this is crazy. Anyway, really, what I wanted to say, the main thing I wanted to say was we can't stop this until we educate people. They're deluded by the mainstream media and the educational system, and there's no way to reverse this unless we show people first that Jesus Christ is Lord and that His Word is true, and that the only way to take this back is through waking people up. They're too deeply entrenched. Anyway, that's about all I had to say.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate your call here today. Any comment, Ryan?
Well, the group that I work for, the Clarion Fund and Radicalism.org, I just would point out is not a Christian organization or a religious organization, even though I myself am a Christian, and I work very closely with evangelicals. So our mission isn't evangelism, and so we work with Muslims, we work with non-Christians, all for this common cause, and I do think that we have allies across the different faiths that are willing to work with us, and we have to be willing to embrace them.
Let's go next to Kansas City, Missouri, and Leroy, you're on the air.
Hey, I was just commenting on the fact that, what really bothers me most is that you are just as bad. I just happened on your radio station. I apologize if I offend you, but it sure seems to me like you're as negative and just making a scare tactic to Christians out there saying, oh, we got to get rid of these people, when in reality it has nothing to do with that. You know what? If we were just to do what Christ would say to do, and that is to love one another, tell them about the Father and the Spirit, let the Spirit do whatever. But yet, you're just as bad as they are, trying to collect all the money you can collect so that you can fight them and make a negative impression and scare us to death, just like they're trying to scare their people to death.
Well, let's have Ryan comment. Go ahead, Ryan.
Sure. Well, you obviously haven't seen our documentaries. If we did, you wouldn't have called in with a message like that. So I urge you to go to getobsession.com and and type in the coupon code of Crosstalk and see for yourself the type of work that we do. As for trying to insinuate that we're somehow getting rich off of this, I would invite you to look at my wallet because it's just not happening. But we're not demonizing anyone. I mean, all of the documentation that I do of these specific organizations and these specific movements comes from their own words, their own sermons. Our films largely consist of clips taken from Middle Eastern TV stations. And so it's not demonizing when you're just repeating back what they're telling you and what they're doing. And, we're definitely not attacking all Muslims because, as I've said throughout this program, we work closely with Muslims and we put a lot of effort into upholding those that stand against this type of extremism.
I understand all of that, but what I'm saying is, wouldn't your money be rather used doing good than negative? Because, see, everything you're doing is negative. You're telling all the negative, the negative. Your money would much rather be used, I would think, telling about the gospel, telling about what Christ is really doing, rather than tearing somebody down.
Yeah, and thank you, Leroy. And let me just say this again: the guest that is on today is not representing a Christian organization as such. Okay, they are an organization that is there to inform on this issue. Certainly, as a Christian broadcast network here, we do believe in evangelism and sharing the gospel, and our programming format is catered to that regard. But when you talk about negative, it's not positive news to tell someone their house is on fire, but yet it is the truth. And in order to see them saved from the harm of that fire, you have to give that negative message, which has a positive result. And so I believe that would be something that you want to take into consideration there as well. Appreciate your call. We are just seconds away from a break, and we are going to take more of your calls following it here at Crosstalk. 800-733-9829. Ryan Mauro is with us here today from the RadicalIslam.org and WorldThreats.com. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Perhaps you, like I, have been mocked for trying to warn your family and friends and church members of some of the information that we deal with here at our ministry. Oftentimes, the words of the watchman are not only ignored, but despised. Sadly, many of those who have or will mock you for trying to warn them of false teaching, false teachers, the religious Trojan horse, and the rise of a global false church will finally see that you spoke truth, but perhaps for some of them it will be too late. However, for many, it will be too late only after they've taken part in the evil deeds as described in 2 John 9 through 11. Don't become weary, my friends, in warning people about what's happening within the church today. We're commanded in Acts 20, Romans 16:17, and in Ephesians 5:11 to guard the church and expose false teaching. Be encouraged, for great is your reward.
Our guest here today, warning about gradualism, the Islamic strategy for victory, and talking about the areas of gradualism taking place. And we are taking your calls here today at Crosstalk. We're going to continue on in New Lisbon, Wisconsin. And Diana, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, the Muslim people of Muslim descent, a lot of them have been getting into many, many different walks of life. I mean, they're in every walk of life, and many, many of them have assimilated themselves into different jobs, such as small businesses, and a lot of them, very many of them, are working in the medical profession. I have a friend who works at a VA hospital, and she said that she was working right alongside a lot of these people. You know, they had all these Muslim names and everything, you know. And she said she never thought much about it, and they were just friends, and she talked along with them and everything until that shooting at Fort Hood. That scared her. She said it just seemed like at any minute she was afraid somebody at their facility was just going to go off on them or something, you know. And look what they've done in Dearborn, Michigan. These people are selling their homes. They can't even, sleep in the morning because they got the Muslim call to prayer in the morning, and I have 2 kids that were born in Michigan, so I have people that were, their aunts and uncles and stuff that still live up there, and it's changed a lot of stuff up there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Diana.
And is there anything still being done about that Fort Hood thing, or have they just dropped it?
No, the prosecution is still ongoing.
Okay, because you don't hear nothing about it, but boy, we're still hearing about the guns, aren't we?
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Thank you, Diana.
Okay.
To Cheryl in Minnesota, you're on the air.
Yes, I have to rephrase what I was going to say, but I pray that. I pray that the people will constantly uphold the church, even to the Muslim people, and let them know that we stand for Jesus, and that He is Lord, and that we're not going for anything else. We're not settling for anything else other than the Lord Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Cheryl. George in Washington, you're on the air.
Hi. I don't think people are nearly scared enough about radical Islam. I think they've really been lulled into sleep. I mean, a few years back, I was talking to a coworker. She said, I'm sure they just like anybody else. They think that God is their father. And that's not even an Islamic concept. As my understanding, one of the things written on the top of the Dome of the Rock is God has no son. There really needs to be an alarm set off. I mean, good grief, this is a religion that officially says it is a virtue to lie to infidels, which means anybody is not a Muslim. So, I mean, how on earth do we import, people that have that? And then what? You got to take an oath of citizenship maybe one day? What's that mean?
George.
That they are not going to be holding to any foreign potentates, et cetera. No.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. And this is something that you've pointed out here, Ryan, is when you look through that 6-step process there of Sharia over the individual, the family, society, and then the government. But the endline goal is mastership of the world. I mean, that is very much it's a political goal, but it's a goal of conquest as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's because Islam as a whole does talk about a day when the whole world becomes Islamic, and then there's true peace and justice throughout the world. That's a staple of Islam. But what the Islamists do is they take it upon themselves, and they say our goal is to make that happen, and what that entails is instituting Sharia law around the world, first starting with the Middle East and then spreading to Europe and making sure you destroy Israel and all of these other objectives.
And to Milwaukee. Jessica, you're on the air.
Yeah, the caller before sort of echoed what I was going to say, and that is the previous caller that was talking about scare tactics. Yeah, I agree. You can't scare people enough. They are not scared enough. And if the truth is scary, it's scary. And I don't believe your guest is using scare tactics. He's just telling the truth, which is being hidden from us, from the mainstream media and so on, and bless him for doing that kind of work.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say also that, Jesus used some pretty strong tactics that could be called scare tactics, in the name of salvation to save people. And you all are just trying to save people, not scare people, and just bless you and good luck with all that.
Thank you, Jessica.
I'm going to listen. Thank you.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you very
Appreciate that. And Ryan, again, I'll reiterate the fact that you're saying when you went through that 6-step process, this is in their own words. I mean, it's not something that you've developed or it's some secret code. This is what Islamists are actually saying.
Right. It doesn't require any analysis on my part. It's a very easy thing to do. I just quote their own documents and their own leaders.
To Anita, calling from Crivets, you're on the air.
Yes. Thank you. Can you tell us if you know of any means by which we can impede or prevent a mosque being built in a local community? And would you explain what a mosque means in Islam, what its value is to them?
A mosque is a house of worship in Islam, so it's the equivalent of a church or a synagogue. Now, in terms of stopping mosques locally, that's not a campaign that I involve myself in because we do have freedom of religion in this country. And be aware that any precedent that's set to stop mosques from being constructed just because it's simply a mosque is something that can later be used against a church. So we have to be very careful with this. Now, but at the same time, I have spoken out against mosques that have ties to Hamas and other records of extremism, and so that's the area that I specifically focus on.
Great. And again, folks, that is the position of the organization our guest is representing today. Of course, you've heard Usama Daktak here on the air as well, who has given warning regarding some aspects here, because in many cases we've seen the mosque becoming the platform for the very tenets and beliefs of Islam to be perpetrated, certainly for the doing away with the infidels. But we've covered that many programs, and no doubt we will have that here again as well. Our time is out here today. Ryan, thank you for being with us. And again, the website where our listeners can get that DVD?
They can go to getobsession.com and then type into the Crossfire into the coupon code there, and then they can get it for free and just pay for shipping, and it'll come to your house.
Okay, that would be type in the word Crosstalk.
Crosstalk, that's right. I'm sorry.
Great. Well, Ryan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Ryan Mauro, our guest here today on Crosstalk, and again, folks, their organization coming from this, from a perspective here of warning as far as the political aspects here of it. Of course, at Crosstalk as well, we are concerned about the soul, the teachings of Islam. Yes, they don't measure up to the teachings of Scripture. We carry daily revealing the truth about Islam that certainly gives warning regarding the very tenets and beliefs of this false religion. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.